us. I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department. And we're really thrilled to bring you this panel. It's the second in our series, which we think is so important, called Performance Ear Training for Guitarists. We've got four incredible faculty members with us today, and Cheryl Bailey, who's our assistant chair. So I want to introduce Cheryl first. Hey, Cheryl, how are you?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is going to be a great session.
Yeah.
A lot to learn.
So our four faculty members who are joining Cheryl and I are the faculty who teach the class called PSGT 365, which is Advanced Guitar Performance, traditionally for students who are getting to a very high level of checking of their performance skills. A lot of performance majors take the class, although it is open to many of you who would like to take it. And some of you may remember that it used to be curated by Mick Goodrick. So as Mick retired, Tim, David Tronzo, David Gilmore, and John have taken over in their own way. And so we thought this would be a great way for them to talk about a really essential topic in guitar playing and music in general, which is your approach to rhythm. So you're going to get to know each of these faculty members, these artists, today a little bit differently. Please go after this is over and look them up. Look up David Tronzo, look up David Gilmore, look up Tim Miller, and look up John Finn, and get familiar with their playing, with their recordings, with their compositions. And I think you'll find a lot of things in there to keep learning from. So thank you all for being here. Thanks to four of you for being here. We're going to start out by asking each person just to talk about your general approach to rhythm in your playing and in your teaching, just maybe even from an overview perspective. So Tim Miller, would you like to start? Just give us a 3-minute perspective on where you're coming from with rhythm.
Sure. From a teaching perspective, I would say I generally like to identify what I would consider to be the three things that cause timing problems, and I like to go over that with my students, and we see where they are with those three things. And the first one would be your internal concept, I would call it, and that's your ability to sing rhythms. So, your ability to sing along with recordings and sing exact rhythms with duration and dynamics, and be able to sing along with a metronome, accurate rhythms. The next thing, the thing I've found is that if someone is unable to sing rhythms, they're usually unable to play them. I found that in my experience for myself and for my students. So singing is the first component for me. The next thing is kind of technical, and it's do we have the ability to actually play a rhythm, with our hands, on the instrument? Because sometimes there are certain shapes and there are certain situations. Perhaps it's a melodic line, perhaps it's a finger picking pattern. Depending on the shape of the line and the way it's played, do we have the technique to be able to play that rhythm accurately? Because that's the next thing, in my opinion, that causes time problems, is just a technical problem. So can you hear it? Can you sing it? Can you technically play it? And then the third thing that we usually go over is, are you able to keep your focus on listening to what you are playing and what you are playing with? So are you playing with another guitar player? Are you playing with a metronome? Are you playing with a drummer? Are you playing along with a recording? Are you able to keep your focus on your own playing and what you're playing with? And are you able to keep that focus kind of strong enough so that you can determine whether you are playing accurately with that? And a lot of times, since we tend to delete things around us, when, like, for example, if you're talking to someone in a crowd, you can speak to that person and focus on what they're saying and delete the other things around you. Oftentimes in music, if we're having a technical problem, or what we do is we delete the listening. And so we have to be able to maintain the focus so that our internal concept can flow. We have the technical ability to play the certain passage, and we're listening for any problems that are happening in the moment. I think those three things are um, the three essential elements that typically cause time problems, and I tend to work on those with my students.
That was perfect. And Tim Miller doesn't have a time problem because I just want to say that we said we're going to try for 3 minutes, and that was exactly a 3 minute answer. I don't know if you meant for that to happen, but it took me a second to hit stop, and it was like three on the dot. So Tim Miller, he practices his time. He is aware of his time. That's amazing. Thank you, Tim. Um, David Tronzo, what about you? What do you think of it as your general approach?
I think that following Tim Miller's act is going to be very difficult. That's the first thing that I'm going to say. Um, my approach. So it's a couple of things. First of all, I just want students to understand that there are, in the world of rhythm, there's a very wide range of things that are just in common practice, and we're going to approach them from different angles. And, in a kind of a boiled down way, there's notatable rhythms and various kinds of ways that we notate, but, I'm referring mostly to standard notation rhythms. And then there's non-notatable, or ways of interpreting even notated stuff, right? So we start with the notated rhythms, and I have these exercises, that are like, I have we'll talk about this probably more later, but this, a 16th note workout with all these different groups and breakups of 16th notes so they can really dial in. We might use just modes of scales or something to practice these. There's a variety of ways we can do it depending on the, the comfort level of the student. There's a triplet version of this. So we're counting, we're tapping, we're playing, we're singing, and we can start it and go as slow as we need to. The tempos are always slow. I recommend that we work at 60 or less on the metronome for this stuff, which I did as a function of practice for an enormously long time. Like I live under 60 on the metronome in my practice regimen now for, over 40 years. I practice down in between 40 and 20 sometimes, and sometimes below 20. But we work on notatable rhythms, and then we might work on, like identifying what those are in music we're hearing. Could be rhythm patterns in, comping or rhythm guitar, could be melodies. And, this is tied into being able to maybe sight read rhythms. And then once we get into that whole area of rhythm that is not necessarily notatable, or things we do to rhythms feel-wise, that, and there's a lot of music in the world that does not notate. And the whole idea of pulse versus metronomic tempo and whatever. We can get into that from all kinds of standpoints. Dance, the whole world of dance, music for dance, and modern dance and stuff involves a whole nother sense of time. World music of different kinds, different cultures, right? But I always want to stress to students that rhythm is the first principle of music. It is what drives or allows everything else to exist. So rhythm is your first thing you want to deal with. And if you're going after other things before that, that could lead to some misunderstandings that are pretty profound. So that's it.
Okay, Tim, you've got a colleague here. That was literally exactly 3 minutes. You guys, you're hired. That's all I have to say. Yeah. Not to pressure. I'm sure the others will do just as well. But David Gilmore, what about you? What's your...
The bar is set high now. I don't know if let me cheat and put a timer on here. No, yeah, well, first I'll just talk about my, I don't know, concept. My belief is, rhythm, as Dave Tronzo said, is really the primary element that people connect to first, it seems, even before melody and harmony. And so there's just so many different cultures, and it's expressed in so many different ways, and people feel it in so many different ways. And so for me, I grew up listening to all types of music. I tended to gravitate toward music that had a very strong rhythmic drive to it, like R&B, funk music, and later on jazz and things like that. And I don't know if it's, what came first, the chicken or the egg, but basically that listening to that music has helped me develop a so-called strong sense of rhythm. At least I think I have a strong sense of rhythm listening to that music. It has a drive. And I've noticed, through experience that people who listen to other types of music have a different rhythmic sensibility. So it's a matter of, first of all, being aware of the different types of how people interpret rhythm and understanding it and respecting it. And when it comes to playing together, that's where we need to learn how to find a common ground. And that's where things start to develop in terms of issues like at school. So I do work with, feeling subdivisions based off of 16th note, upbeats. As Dave said, like I work on the metronome like at 50 and below, and try to have an empty measure and try to develop the physical relationship of rhythm to the body, because that's really where it's coming from. You kind of have to be your own human metronome to get a steady time feel, which is only one aspect of rhythm. But so yeah, so we can talk about that further in detail. How was that? 3 minutes?
That was, you got 30, you could go for 30 seconds more.
I feel like Joe Biden. He like always ended his his
No,
sentences early.
but we respect a person who feels like they found the ending. So like that's totally great.
All I'm
That's
gonna
another
say.
part of improvisation is what I've learned from you guys. So there you go. That's great. Jonathan, what are your thoughts about this, about your general approach to rhythm?
Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Unmuted. So there's that unmute button. Um, okay, so for me, for many years, I thought I had a good sense of time until I was doing a recording session with this drummer, and we were doing this like really slow 6/8 gospel kind of ballad sort of a thing, and there was no click track. And my job was to just kind of hit the 2 and 4, which kind of goes to what everybody's been saying about practicing to a slower metronome, um, which I'm a big fan of that. So what was amazing was that we didn't play those tracks to a click track, yet we did 2 or 3 different takes of the same tune, and the drummer was able to bring every take to within a tenth of a second in terms of length for each take, which was amazing. And then, I asked him later how he did that, and what he was telling me what he does is he subdivides every beat down to the smallest increment he can think of. So years later, I worked with another drummer who was coming up with similar results. This time we were playing to a click track, and when he was playing with the click track, you could not hear the click at all. So he was a guy who was just driving the truck straight down the middle of the road, right? And so much so that when you listen to the track with the metronome on, you couldn't hear the metronome. And I asked him how he did it, and he gave a completely different explanation. What he was talking about was this whole idea that I don't subdivide every beat. What I do is if the song's 3 minutes long, then I know how far away the beats are. So his concept was to think about rhythm from sort of a macro standpoint. And as he talked about it in detail, part of me was going, "You're completely nuts," until I heard him do it, and then it was like flawless. So my takeaway is that I've got so much to learn about how to play in time, which I think is important. Um, how you interpret time feel is kind of a big thing. So I guess my takeaway in terms of how I use it is I never try to take my time feel for granted, And when I teach it, I try to teach that, to be really sort of hyper aware of, first of all, where your time feel is, and secondly, how are you interpreting it relative to the music that you're playing. So that's it. Thank you.
That was perfect. You all, I think you've all proven that you have great feel for time. Like, John, you just demonstrated that you can be a macro.
No, I was dragging the beat. I
macro
was 6
pro.
seconds over.
No, only if you count the part where you were muted, but I didn't. So
Right.
you were.
Okay, good.
Cheryl, what's on your mind?
Yeah, well, those are all tremendous. I mean, I could just listen to this first intro to this whole thing over and over again. There's so much there. I had been thinking, maybe my question, you can answer it in any way, angle of it. I'd have been thinking about transcribing, when you're transcribing, and that place where rhythm intersects articulation and feel. But I guess the other side of it was that I was thinking about, and I think when David was talking about this, Gilmore, we got a lot of Davids here, is this thing of you can intellectually understand a rhythm. I understand a quarter note, but do you feel a quarter note, and getting to that place where you feel that inside, that you're expressing it outside? Like that's what's got to come across, not just I understand that, or I understand an eighth note. So I guess maybe my question now sort of morphed into getting to that place where you take it from an intellectual idea. Here's a quarter note, here's an eighth note, here's a triplet, and turning that into a feel. And of course, that feel is going to depend, what are you playing? Are you funky? Is it funky? Is it swinging? Is it a straight eighth feel? Is it rock feel? So I guess you could answer that on the thing of like, maybe even too, I was thinking about articulation too, when you're transcribing, how do you translate that? So you could take that where you want. Do you want to go in the same order?
Yeah, let's go
Okay.
in the same order.
Okay.
So,
I hope that question made sense.
yeah, that's great. Those some of those things that you said seem to be the unwritten aspects, things that you can't write in a way, that you can only listen to and interpret from the sound that you're hearing. So it does seem like transcription, what you mentioned earlier, would be the best way to develop that, or a lot of listening and then singing along. So for me, transcription can be singing along with the recording and singing the placement, the accents, and the duration of the pitches, or it could be actually playing it on the instrument, or in my case, it's usually both. But I think that since you typically can't or wouldn't write, you don't typically, like you said, when you have an eighth note, you don't typically write the duration of that eighth note. You know what I mean? In written music. And you don't typically, you can write an accent, but you just can't really get those things on paper. So for me, it's where the listening comes in full force. And I think in order to develop it, I think basically you have to copy it. Because how else would you get an accent in a language or a time feel in a style of music other than listening, absorbing, and then starting to focus on, I would focus on the placement of the note. Is it behind the beat? Is it right on the beat? Is it kind of pushing, is it where is it, you know what I mean? And certain styles have different ways that, different note placement. I would also check out the accent of the notes, like what notes are accented, what notes are, and a lot of times I focus on accents, but the other side of that, which is what notes are like sort of ducked down. So sometimes the quiet dynamics for me are more important than the actual loud dynamics. So you can play loud on any instrument, but it's actually not that easy to play quiet on an instrument. So I feel like when I'm dealing with this, where the accents, I'm kind of dealing with where the quiet accents are almost more than the loud accents. Um, and then I feel like after the dynamic accents thing and the placement are I kind of know what's happening there. Then duration is also very important to the feel, because the length of the note, like where it stops, it's like, does the note stop in time? Usually with people with really good time, I find that the end of the note is usually in time, not just the beginning of the note. So duration to me comes into play. So those elements, I think if you put them all together and you you make it a whole thing, I think that can be like your doorway into sort of a deeper understanding of feel.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. What about David Tronzo?
Well, there was so much in what Tim said that's right on the money. The first thing I'm going to say about myself, though, is that I did not, and to this day do not, transcribe. I have never done that. I have never transcribed on paper anything. But what I did do was similar to what Tim was talking about, and I'm sure other people have done this, is I not only listened and played along sometimes with things that I was listening to, but I would listen and then I would play solo or with other musicians, and I would do a version of what I took in. And I looked at all of the phrases, for example, if we're talking about linear stuff or even comping things, I would look at it from a standpoint of like everything's gestural. So a phrase length has this gestural architecture. It's got a lot of information in there, dynamics, attacks. We talk about this thing in when in our courses, the 7 parameters of sound, and one of the parameters of sound that you have to become attuned to as a musician is the envelope of a note, for example. The envelope has an attack at the front and a release at the end and a sustain in the middle and a decay, right? And the attack, a lot of guitar players pay attention to attack, but they don't often pay attention to release. And this is very significant. But like if I was listening, because if I was listening, for example, to Ornette Coleman records, and I wanted to sort of, in a way, I guess I was trying to imitate what they were doing. I was trying to find out the ideas, find out the way it felt and all this stuff. I would just try to do a gestural version of it, with pitches that I would define. I was also very defiant. I said, I'm not going to copy these lines. I'm going to come up with my version. I thought at a young age, like, someday I will stand next to this person if I'm lucky. What do I want to sound like? Because I certainly don't want to sound like them, And so I would say, why, I would think about their rhythms and what they were doing, like what was its impact? The rhythms are tied to why you're saying what you're saying. An exercise I was given very early as a suggestion, because I didn't have a lot of guitar lessons until I was way along, An exercise was take a recorded speech and then play the speech, right? So play the language. Take a recorded language. We do this with singers all the time. We try to play like the singers sing, maybe, or whatever, The third thing I'll say is the guitar is the guitar. We have to look at what the guitar does and what it can do. And I'm not going to imitate a horn or a violin or a piano in the same way. I'm not going for that. I'm going to look at what the guitar does. And then I'll close by saying that it became apparent to me, especially in the studio, that a beat is a large surface. It has a top, it has a front, and it has a back, and in different styles, like, lean into the back or lean in front, or in a phrase, push the front, lean the back, or whatever. It's all about this thing where there's layers of actual independent time and rhythm going on very subtly. So, we'd have to take that in almost like in its entirety, or I did anyways, through my body, basically. Thanks.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think what we're going to find with all these answers is there's so many things that intersect. And then for those of you who are listening, in the next section moving forward, these guys are going to break down for you how you can practice different things. So just take in the whole, and then we'll get specific as we go. So that being said, David Gilmour, what do you think about this topic?
Yeah, there's so many things that intersect here, and what comes to mind really is specifically talking about the guitar and what goes into a good time feel. There's so much that affects that. So where we're playing a phrase, how we're picking, where we're picking on the string, uh, what group of notes on what strings. It's endless. And so over the years, I've discovered that working with, I would say, working probably with horn players more than anybody else has taught me, first of all, how to phrase like them, or at least try to phrase like them, which is a really hard thing to do. To have the same dynamics that they're able to do on their instrument with their breath. To be able to take that control, if that's something you want to do. Let's just take, like a jazz style. And if you want to approach that on guitar, you do have to take into account how you're playing a particular piece of music. And a lot of people will, spend their career not really addressing that. Or they learn a certain way technically from when they were young, and that's the way they continue on that path technically. And it doesn't match what they're hearing or what they would like to do rhythmically. And they're sort of stuck in that zone because their technique has really, solidified how their rhythm's going to be, and maybe tone and articulation and all that stuff. So having worked with some horn players who kind of pointed out to me, you really want to emphasize on the eighth note swing, boom, dan, 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 dan. Whereas on guitar it's easier to do da 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 da. The first note is the heavier note. To do it on the upbeat, as a sax player might do, for example, is something that you really have to work out on the guitar. So technique has a lot to do with the rhythm, the duration, the sound. All of that stuff is interrelated, and I continue to try to find new approaches to that, depending on what I'm doing, like fast tempo music, where certain in position playing may not work. Now I have to sort of spread it out over 3 notes on one string and try to do hammer on and pull offs and more legato technique, which often helps my rhythm, because I may not have the quickest, there's only a few John McLaughlin's and Al Di Meolas in the world who are able to pretty much, rip off anything in ridiculous time. And having said that, that's a particular sound too, and you may or may not want that. But in terms of rhythmic accuracy, you can't deny that they're spot on. They're very much on the beat, which is not really something I'm going for. So you have to kind of develop your technique around what you're hearing, basically. Yeah.
That's great. John Finn, what's your take on this intersection?
Okay, well, so well, the first thing I think I wanted to say is that in terms of transcribing, I do a fair amount of transcribing, but when I do, it's like I think about like all those things that everybody said already about like how much can you actually commit to to the paper, about how much you about the accuracy of which you transcribe. I think that's a great point. So to that, when I transcribe, what I typically do is I put on the page what I think the player meant. So in other words, if somebody's playing like a phrase that's like back phrase 16ths and maybe kind of crams a couple of other notes in there, I'm gonna write it out in the way that makes the most common sense to me, but I'm not thinking of it as an exact documentation of what happened, like an event list, as much as when I transcribe, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get inside the player's head. What do I think that they were thinking about and then what can I learn from what I think they were thinking about? So, so that's that. Those are the kind of things that I think about when I'm doing the transcribing. Now, in terms of time feel, one of the things I was thinking about was the first time that I worked with the Boston Pops. Um, there was this piece that so Keith gives the downbeat and I have to play an A minor chord at the downbeat of beat one of the piece. So he gives the preparatory beat and then he gives the downbeat and then everybody's supposed to come in. But what happened was I come in all by myself, right? And then what felt like 4 minutes later, the rest of the orchestra kind of followed, behind me. So, and then like everybody in the orchestra looks back on me as like, okay, well, I guess the noob just showed up, and so I very quickly learned that the way that orchestra functions is that to them the beat isn't this line in the sand that that you deal with. Like when you're playing with a small group, it's like ready 1 2 3 4, and everybody just kind of manages the time feel in whatever way they need to be stylistically appropriate. With that particular group, from where I sit, the beat feels more like a wave that comes at me. So he gives the downbeat, the wave comes at me, I wait for it to crest by the time it gets to me, and then I play. And then there's this illusion that everybody's playing in time. So now, they do that better than anybody. Like once I figured that out, I started realizing that that's all about how they function. And there's a million reasons why they do that are probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about. But it really showed me that, like, man, I thought my sense of time was pretty good, but I've got so much to learn, and I've just still been kind of a student ever since, I guess. So that's it. How did I do, Kim?
You're great. I mean, this is like, you all really do have an expert sense of time. I mean, Cheryl, we picked the best panel in the world. I mean, we already knew. It's just confirming every 3 minutes. It's like, we're confirming this. I want to take a second to say that as a classical musician, I love everything you're saying. And I think it's just worth it to let everyone know that this applies to every style. That if you have notation, it's a map. It's a gestural map of music that has been created that gives you a sense of how you may interpret it. And there's all kinds of layers to that you can explore, how you write articulation, how you convey. And then when you're playing, it's everything about your playing. Everything everyone said is right on, and down to your tone, to your feel, everything becomes a part of the way you work on rhythm. And before we ask the next question, Cheryl, what did you think about what was said? Did you want to add any thoughts, since that was your question that you were thinking about?
No, because what's great for me as a teacher is that, these are all things that I've said, but I like to hear them in other people's voices because I'm going to steal all of it. I'm transcribing this and I'm going to steal all your licks.
Yeah, and also this is great because all of you may have said something similar to this in a class, but then if your students are watching, they'll come to you next class and say, Tim Miller said this great thing, and then you can be like, yes, that's exactly right, or David Gilmour or David Tronzo, so we're all helping each other, so it's great. So our next question that people were thinking about is, all of you have had extensive professional careers, and you've played in many different styles and different settings, from what John mentioned in the Pops to all kinds of different improvisational and stylistic events and venues and bands and all kinds of things. Was there a moment that sticks out to each of you in which you said, this is going to change my perspective on time. This is going to shift my perspective on the way I think of rhythm. And I know that you're all thinking it because I'm watching the gallery and everyone's laughing. So, Tim Miller, what sticks out to you right now?
Well, I think it's almost like every gig with a really good band is that moment all the time, because we talk about being eternal students. I mean, anytime I get a chance to play with a great drummer, I there's just something that I'm noticing, that's going to change the way, I play, even in just a little subtle thing, a subtle way. So I think that's happening all the time. I don't think I could pinpoint one thing, but I do remember one that was pretty significant. It was back in college, actually, and I was recording. We were recording a demo or something like that in a studio, and I was playing with this really great drummer. His name is Rob F. Sherry, and he now plays with Andy Timmons' band. He's a great drummer and an old friend. And I remember we were in the studio. We were playing a ballad. We were playing a slow piece, and I was on the acoustic guitar. And um, I was feeling kind of tense a little bit, like when I was playing, and I just felt like the take wasn't really happening. I don't know. And the drummer got on, and he was like, "Hey Tim, he's trying to be really cool about it because he's a good friend of mine. But he's like, man, you're rushing right now, and can you just you know pull back on the time a little bit because it's making everything feel a little tense." And it was a moment of awareness for me. It just raised my awareness of rushing, because rushing is kind of one of the worst time problems that you can have, in my opinion. And so this guy who's a good friend, who also I respected highly, who had a really great time, he was like, man, you're rushing, like, and it was just a moment of realization that this is something that I need to focus more on. And ever since then, it just kind of heightened my awareness, and it was something that, moving forward, I always thought about that studio date where I got called out for my rushing. And you know every time that I start to rush, I can now feel it. It's like I have a self awareness enough to know that I'm rushing. Like, here it comes again. Just like, relax, let's pull it back. That kind of thing. So uh, I think that's the one I remember the most, because it's affected me my whole career so far.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's a good story. That it's amazing that you internalized it to that point, and that's possible to internalize that awareness so you can benefit from it as you move forward.
I think when someone tells you that you respect and they tell you in a direct way, sometimes those are the best learning moments. So I often don't hesitate to do that with my students. Like, I tell them nicely, but in a direct way, look at the rushing. It's distracting. You need to work on your time. Because if someone tells you, sometimes they can have this impact that you remember for a really long time, and it can actually really affect your playing in a good way.
Yeah, that's great. David Tronzo, what pops up for you?
Well, the first thing is this thing that Tim was talking about, where, I'm looking at this panel, for example, I'm thinking of our colleagues and, everybody that's on this. If we sat down and played in duos and trios and groups or whatever, just us guitar players, the primary difference between us would be our sense of rhythm and time and how we express that. That's like all the stuff that we use is all built around that kind of ideal, and that's like the great intersection. So like, and if I'm in an ensemble of any kind, like projects that I had years ago, for example, that really clicked, it was primarily because we all thought about time and rhythm the same way, and we felt it. And when it doesn't click, sometimes it's not a matter of agreeing on a quarter note or rushing or falling. It's bigger, and you have to honor that. So there's a couple of stories, real quick. These are all very brief. They're from my professional time. I had the good fortune to play a lot of music from different cultures. And here's a couple of eye-opening moments. I'm playing with a Gambian kora player named Fode Suso. We're playing duos. We're doing these duo concerts. And he turns to me one day, and I'm actually doing quite well in the music. He's happy. And he turns to me one day and he says, African six, not like American six. That's all he said. And I just went like, got it. Like, I'm going to go work on that. Another one was, I was playing Nawan music, this Moroccan Nawan music, with a guy named Hassan Hakmoun, who had come to America. And you learn this music, like a lot of music's like this, you learn it by dancing first and singing second, and then you play the instrument, right? And I was having trouble, a lot of Americans have trouble. We feel the one in a different place of these units of melody. But the rhythms themselves toggle between 3 and 2, right on the edge, so they become duple and triple almost simultaneously. And I was having difficulty with the rhythms. And one day he turns to me and he goes, "You've never ridden a camel, have you?" Literally. And I said, "No, I've never ridden a camel." He said, "If you took a trip in the desert and you rode a camel, this is the rhythm we get from the camel. It's this rhythm that has this 3-part kind of beat thing, right?" The last story, there's a bunch, but the last story I'll tell is I'm sitting there playing some music that a composer wrote, and this was really common in New York, especially in the 80s, where people would write without bar lines, but they would write note values. So the phrases appear as notes of various values. And then maybe there's an apostrophe, like a breath mark, and then there's notes. And so you're doing relative value melody playing, but you can speed up or slow down the phrase. They can change in the duration of the time between them. So everything about the performance is now this thing you have to reanimate in a felt way. And I said, okay, I'm going to log that too, And there's like hundreds of these different variations that have happened. And everyone was like, okay, now you got another thing to go work on and study. And I just thrilled to this, to this day. And there's many more. Thanks.
That's great. You're also on time. You get in and out of the questions. It's great. That's great. Did you ever ride the camel?
I did not, but I had this wonderful conversation with Jamie Haddad years later. Jamie was, teaching at the school. He's a percussionist. And he rode the camel. And he said, it's exactly correct. It's the rhythm of riding a one-hump desert caravan, like a camel trained camel.
There you go. That's great. David Gilmore, what are you thinking about this?
Wow, I got to try that camel technique in my advanced rhythmic class.
Make sure it's the one-hump camel, though, and not the two. It's probably different.
Right. Totally different rhythm, yes. A couple of things. I remember having sort of a revelation playing with Steve Coleman, and he had, Steve, if you know his music, it's very complicated rhythmically, a lot of odd meter stuff, and I kind of thought I had my rhythmic odd meter stuff together, listening to Fusion and back in the days, John McLaughlin and Return to Forever, all that stuff, and getting together with him was like a totally different thing. And so I was kind of hanging in there for dear life. And there's this one tune he does called Change the Guard. It's in 7. And it's in 7, but there's like multiple layers of it. And some parts are like a short 7 and some are in a long 7. And I just didn't know where to fit in on the thing. And so I can't remember where I was feeling. I think I was feeling the short 7. And of course, if you feel it short, like a 7/8, and the tempo, night after night would get faster and faster. It's like, and I just couldn't keep up. And this may sound simple to some people, but after a while, I figured out, wait, I can do a long 7, but the trick was to play certain parts and hear it against this long pulse, as opposed to the short pulse I was sort of trapped into. And it just one day it just sort of clicked. I heard the phrase against a longer pulse, and I was able to now go kind of switch between both pulses, a fast and a slow one. And that was a kind of a game changer for me, hearing things in a bigger perspective. Fast forward a couple of decades later, and I was doing this, I had this pop gig with Joss Stone, and I'm doing a rehearsal in Florida with some, the band is like super groovy, super funky. And I'm like, yeah, man, this is a piece of cake. I grew up with this stuff, R&B, and I'm thinking I'm in the pocket, I'm playing, grooving along to this tune. And the drummer stops. He's like, Dave, do you think you can, just lay back a little bit? And I'm like, I'm playing laid back. I got really a little attitude there. I was like, and then I laid back a little, and then he stopped it again. Must have stopped like 2-3 times, the music director. And I was like, what am I doing wrong here, And they explained it to me and it took me a minute, and that was like, okay, I need to really investigate this a little bit. So I finally got it in the rehearsal, but it was, this very subtle thing that I was doing that made me think, wow, I really got to work on this. I thought I kind of had this together. So that, and a lot of little other things here and there. And listening to music, I had a session one time where Marvin Smitty Smith was his drummer, and he did this drum solo, and he was playing all this crazy bombastic stuff, but the form was right on spot, and I just could not keep the form during his drum solo. It was driving me crazy. I listened to the playback. I've listened to the CD since then, and still at certain spots where I always lose it, and only a couple times. So there's always something that comes your way that throws you off, that that you have to work on, like whatever subdivision. It's like some drummers particularly have tricks up their sleeve that tend to sound like they play on the offbeat, and they make it sound like it shifts to a totally different thing, and it still throws me off. So there's always something to work on. Yeah.
That's great. John, what about you? What comes up for you as a moment? Maybe another moment, since you shared that great one from the pod.
Okay, so well, what I was thinking about actually, and Dave Gilmore, I can definitely relate to what you're saying. It's like when you get on the gig, you want to come across as confident. You want to feel like you know what you're doing, and then so you assert, I know what I'm doing, and you play in a manner that's confident, and then people start vibing you. And and I do the same thing. It's like I immediately get defensive. It's like, what do you mean? And so anyway, so I was thinking. So years ago, Berklee was celebrating its 65th anniversary, and they were putting on this big gala of concert event over at the Wang Theater, where Paul Simon's band was supposed to be the house band for all these different artists that were going to be coming in. So 2 days before the concert happens, I get a phone call from the performance division saying, listen, Paul Simon's band is going to be playing, but as it turns out, their guitar players don't read. So will you come in and play all of the non-Paul Simon stuff for this concert? I said, well, of course, I would love to. Thank you, thank you for thinking of it, So, they gave me all the music ahead of time, and, there was some challenges in there, but it was, so the basic idea is Paul Simon's band's rhythm section, plus a horn section, plus a string section. Those are all Berklee students, so that's kind of the setup. And then, so the drummer was the drummer was Steve Gadd. Bass player was Abraham Laboriel, which from that era were two of my favorite bass player and drummer rhythm section combinations ever. So for me, it was like ridiculous getting the chance to play with them. And so anyway, so we're at the rehearsal, and most of the things are going fine. And this woman comes out that none of us expected to see there, and she sort of puts a chart on my music stand on the way by, and she hands out all the parts to everybody else, and she says, "Okay, well, she's been added," and I forget who she was. It was some girl that was kind of doing sort of a Latin poppy kind of a thing, and so we started playing it. We get through playing the tunes fairly simple, fairly straightforward, and she turns to me. She says, "Guitar player, can you?" And she makes a suggestion. So okay, so I try to do it, and we play through it again. She stops about halfway through. No, not quite like that. Kind of more like this. And then after a few minutes, it was clear she got caught in this thing where I'm in her, I'm in her head. I'm in her target range, and all she's thinking about is how I'm going to sound better. And of course, I'm playing in front of all these people, and I'm trying to not be an idiot, and it's just starting to feel like worse and worse as this going west. So Steve Gadd stands up and he says, "Hey, can I talk to him for a second?" And she says, "Yeah, sure." So he turns around to me so that she couldn't see, turns the glasses upside down and says, "You've been a musician your whole life. You've played with a lot of vocalists. You've played with a lot of musicians. You know what you're doing. You know how to do this. So what I want you to do is I want you to listen to what we're doing and find something that sounds good with that. And then he turns around back to her and says, okay, he's fine. We've got this, right? So, and what that did for me was it just sort of forced me to just kind of play maybe a third or less of what I was originally doing, and then just spend most of my energy listening to what everybody else was doing, and then just trying to add and contribute to that and just relax and play the music, which is something I'd forgotten how to do in that moment. Okay. So, we get through the piece, and then she turns around to Steve and says, "Thank you, Steve." But man, I have to thank him too, because it was exactly the right way to handle that situation. So for me, in terms of time feel, the lesson I got out of that was just, listen to what's happening with the music, and then find something that sounds good with that. And how you frame your time feel is a big part of that. So that's it.
That's great. I want to follow up with Tim and David Tronzo because both David Gilmour and John Finn mentioned they had a couple different stories that talked about music that has complexity, right? That has a certain amount of rhythmic complexity and the kind of issues that can come up there. And then John and David Gilmour, you also brought up, I think it's very common for a lot of people to feel like, well, if music is feel based, if it's like a funk tune or a blues tuner, then there's a simplicity there, but it's really not true, correct? I mean, it's really a complexity of a different type. And so I'm wondering if just briefly, if Tim and David Tronzo could you just comment on that, maybe through one of your experiences with music that's pop music or groove based or blues. Tim, what do you have was there a moment that stood out when you're working on rhythm in that context for you?
Um, I mean, I'm always, if I get into a situation that's complex, which sometimes happens, and maybe let's say I got into a situation that was a little over my head complexity wise, where uh, I wasn't sure what was going to happen or what I should do. I've learned to simplify my playing and not worry. I've tried to, let's just say that. I've tried to focus on playing as little as possible to make the music sound good. If I feel like I'm in a situation where it could go the wrong way and I could start, things could start happening that I don't want to happen musically. So I do consciously work on that, to where if I'm in a situation, just like calm down, play simple rhythms, simple melodies, and play only what the music needs. Now, if I were in a situation where I was totally free and I felt like I could really open up and do whatever I wanted to, it'd be a slightly different story. But I think sometimes we have to develop skills to pull back and say, okay, what does this play only what it needs? Because then you can still sound good in the moment and you can still make good music that people can enjoy, but you won't have that kind of stress of trying to sort of deal with it in a way that you're unable to in the moment. So that's what I could add with that. I mean, I think that what John said was amazing. Just that moment where you learn that skill. I think that's a pretty cool thing to think about. Hopefully, everybody has that moment where they learn that skill, because it can help you in your career, I think, in a lot of different situations.
David Tronzo, what about you? Is there something that struck you when you were playing like pop and blues or music that was more maybe feel based?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot to this, so there's no hard and fast things. But what Tim was mentioning is absolutely right, and John and David touched on this. Like you have to kind of consider the bigger picture, like it's basically like orchestration, and you can fit into anything with very little stuff. So there were these things that you kind of learn, like pop music. You know, when I encountered like recording in the 80s and 90s, for example, there was a lot of formulaic, sort of unspoken things. Like you never entered the tune at the top. So you would go halfway through the first verse at the earliest before you play anything, unless you were responsible for some kind of larger part that was supposed to be in the body of the track or whatever. But generally, there was this idea like, pick your entrances, insert things, whatever. I developed this like concept where I would comp with single notes. So I would represent chords with just single notes, like long tones, like they were almost like string part things, or just these like sounds that would come in. And these didn't always come from a concept like like string parts or whatever. Like organists do that. You know, they'll just play a note and let it sustain for a moment and then take it away. You know, this could be huge. So I would also do things that were not typical for guitar. Like I would do long sustained sounds instead of rhythmic things, and then counter those, you know. But the other thing I want to say is I had experiences that showed me all these different ways to kind of go about, you know, getting comfortable and remembering that I'm a musician and I know actually how to play music and relax, you know. And I was really a fan of, like a profound fan at one point of New Orleans second line music. And I got invited to come down and do some playing with the Wild Chapatulas, which is a New Orleans Indian tribe that does the Mardi Gras. They're a historic, like, Smithsonian treasure group. And we were going to the rehearsal. This friend of mine's driving me to the rehearsal. I said, where are we going? He said, oh, we're going into the Bywater neighborhood. You know, I said, where's the rehearsal? He says, well, you'll see. And we park in front of this bar. Looks like a little dive. And we go in, and it's full of people, like shooting pool and all that stuff. And the Wild Chapatulas are all there. There's no instruments. And all we're going to do is clap and sing and dance the tunes. And then the next time you play, you're on the gig. Let's hope you paid attention. You know what I mean? So I was like, wow, that is so... it was like almost like, now I see how they get that feel. This has nothing to do with playing guitar.
Wow.
So that was really profound. And they were just like, they didn't even ask me a thing. They didn't say a thing. They were just like, yeah, here we go. Beating on the bar, you know. It was beautiful.
That's great. So now that we're in our second hour, I'm wondering if each of you would be willing to take 5 minutes and maybe just take us through a little 5-minute lesson. You can use the metronome or not, whatever you want to do. But just take 5 minutes and maybe just show some of the people who are watching and listening, like how to work on one aspect. It could just be one lesson, one aspect, one thing for them to take home and practice. Tim, what do you think? What do you want to show everyone?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing that I could say with time is that you just have to care about it. And what I mean by that is that if you actually care about it in your playing, then that's the main thing that needs to actually happen. Because I do find some guitarists, let's just say guitarists since we're all guitar players, that don't consider it as part of their sort of world in a way, you know, where they practice, and they practice these kind of fast rubato things that are not in time, or these flurries of notes that don't seem to you know, fit into any kind of, you know, structured rhythm, or the sort of noodling, endlessly kind of noodling, not in time, that type of practicing, if you could call it that. And that tends to lead to kind of nowhere in a lot of ways. Okay, I found for myself anyway. So my first thing is that you have to care about it. you have to care about it so that you're focused on it pretty consistently, pretty much in every moment that you're playing. Whether it's conscious or subconscious, you have to really have that desire to have good rhythm. I feel like if we don't discuss just that, the general desire to bring up a like a strong awareness in your mind, then it can't, in my opinion, it can't really improve. Okay, so if if you care about it, then that means you'll be able to identify the problems in your playing. So what I like to do is I like to practice maybe a tune or a scale or whatever in time, and I like to record it, and I like to see if I can identify what's wrong with it, or if it's good, be able to identify that this is actually good, this is in time, this is dragging, this is rushing, this is inconsistent, the dynamics are messed up, whatever. Identifying the problems. So caring and identifying, to me, if you have those two things while you're playing, it can almost just lead to so many different, it can go down a bunch of different roads, but as long as those two things are in place, it, in my opinion, can be, I think, is the most important thing. So if I'm practicing, or I'm having someone practice with a metronome, because people want just like metronome things, let me get a metronome out. All I'm going to do is I'm going to play and record, and play and record, and play and record, and then make judgments about my playing. So here, let's see. So, I mean, I might even just start with like a little, like a scale or something like that. And I might just say, okay, when you play, let me get this out here. So, okay. So I might record myself playing something like that, like some lines or in a scale or some sort of musical phrase that hopefully makes sense, not just random things. And then I'll record it, and I'll listen back and try to notice something wrong with it. Like, I bet if I listened to that right now, if I were to listen back, I might find like there were a few little moments where I was like, I think that could have been a little tighter, or maybe the duration could have been a little better, or my dynamics could have been better. Okay, so right there, that was a little bit of an improvised line. Okay, but we could take this into anything that you're doing. Let's say you're learning the melody to a song, you're a comping pattern of whatever it is. It doesn't matter if you're a classical player, you're playing a rock tune, you're playing a jazz melody, whatever. Record it with a metronome, and since you care, and since you're able to identify problems in your playing, that whole thing creates this kind of like loop of practicing, and awareness is the key, I think. And knowing when it's not good and knowing when it's good. And I think if you have that, you've got it all, really. Now, there's many, many other things that you can do with time that are really specific and technical, like in terms of like owning each subdivision, like being able to go dot 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 dot, like that, where I'm singing every subdivision while doing this. That's another thing that I like to do. Dot 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 dot, like that, so it's accurate. I have good time here, and I have good time here. Okay, for me, that's that, being able to sing it and having that internal concept thing happening, and then you translate that all to the guitar, and yeah, there's so many things I could talk about, but in 5 minutes, there you go.
That's great. That's a good 5-minute start right there. Thank you, Tim. David Tronzo, what do you think? What do you want to share for 5 minutes with these folks today?
Well, okay, so the first thing I'm going to say is I have these workouts, I call them 16th note workout, triplet workout that I'll bring students through. I'm just going to show one of these. I'm not going to go through it because Tim just described like the importance of it, but it's breaking a 16th note group down into all these combos, you know. So, you know, you would take a metronome at a slow setting. I'll do this at 60, you know, and you take a scale and you have, right, and you're playing your scale as 16th notes, and then eventually you just, you know, go through each group, right? Pretty soon you get down the list and you're doing all your E's, all your ands, right? Et cetera, right? And then all these combinations. Is pretty tricky, right? You mix it with one and. Right, so then you can use them quarterly and whatnot. And we go through this very slowly, very methodically, maybe even just a couple of subdivisions a week. But the real thing that I discovered was critical was this. It goes in a category of things I call super fundamentals. And on a slow metronome, I have found that students are entirely focused on this, marginally focused on this, and never focused on this, generally speaking. So imagine the experience that your body has if I'm at 60 and I take that same scale, which was A major, and I play whole notes. Now I realize how big the beat is. Then I have to breathe and relax. There's a lot of time to meet yourself in there in between those notes. But the cool thing is this, right? You live at whole notes for a while. And when you go to half notes, an interesting thing happens. The energy level goes up in a way in your sense of the music. So when you get to quarter notes, you realize like energetically the music has really shifted gears. And then you get to eighth notes. We haven't syncopated yet. And you go back to whole notes, right? And you really develop this sense of like the grounded nature of the half and whole notes. And then if you want to get into syncopation, sometimes before we get into like crazy stuff, I'll just say, what if you play your whole notes on and? Right? You have to count 4 beats and just feel and. Or E. And, you know, start to get into 16th note subdivisions of E and like related to whole notes or half notes or quarter notes before you even get to eighths. So this world in here is really super powerful. It's like so foundationally powerful. Because in order to do it, I need to breathe, I need to relax, I need to kind of like notice how much my brain wants to distract myself from everything. Like, you know, the metronome, the thing, or whatever. Maybe I'm tensing up, or there's I notice that some students will move their hand right before they go to play the thing, like a muscle impulse that's unnecessary. And then, of course, they'll be late or they'll be off. So it's fascinating what this uncovers. And I show them, or whatever, I take them through this idea that these rhythms down here, the whole notes and half notes and dotted half notes and whatnot, are like, I call them earth rhythms. And the eighth notes and the 16ths, I call them sky rhythms because the earth is heavy and grounded and the sky is lighter and kind of moving up. And the mediator of the two is the quarter notes. And these connect this to this. So I tell them respect the quarter note because it's the negotiator between the two worlds, you know. But living at half notes and whole notes and syncopated half notes and whole notes is often a really enormous, look at that, an enormous discovery of potential for every student to like relate rhythm to their body and their breathing. That's it.
And I think you and Tim both are advocating for making sure you can go back and forth. What happens to your time when you go from shorter durations to longer durations? Make sure that you're still staying in time.
Yep.
As you're going back and forth.
And I'll just say, and notice what happens in your body and your breathing when you go from longer subdivisions to shorter or shorter to longer. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because you have this sense of going faster or slower, right? And there's a body thing that's going to happen. And you really have to tune into that because that is not something you can not afford to be. You have to be aware. You have to be aware. It comes back to awareness.
Yeah, everyone who's watching, you can watch, when you go back and watch the video, you can watch Tim Miller breathing as he played that long line. You can watch David Tronzo breathing. You're going to watch David Gilmour and John Finn also breathing while they're playing. David Gilmour, what about you?
I might be panting. It depends on the complexity of the rhythm. No. So, no, what David was saying about the body is like so important. So, like something that I notice. Well, let me just add to like the metronome stuff, right? Like all the stuff that Tim and David does is like right kind of the stuff that I do as well. All the different subdivisions starting from a whole note, and then kind of working down from that to dotted half to half note triplets, dotted quarters, quarter. So it just gets smaller and smaller. So the ones and threes are kind of if you're tapping your foot, which I actually encourage. I think in classical circles sometimes they say don't tap your foot, but I say tap your foot, bob your head. This is like, you need some kind of counter rhythm in your body. Some people, do the left foot, the right foot, sort of this counterweight. You have to develop some kind of physical relationship to the tempo. So a good way to kind of develop that is I have, you could say this is, 100 BPM. I have it set on 50, but I'm taking out 2 beats. So that's just a downbeat. So that's just, giving yourself space. So now you're forced to kind of fill it in with some kind of just get used to that tempo and then start on one note, with the whole notes. Then so you can either tap your foot to the downbeat and see where it comes back, because it's what you want to do is have the relationship of this against that. And then just work your way down from there. And then once you get used to one note, then you move it around like everybody else is doing, because when you start moving around, that's going to, affect your time, because your mind is starting to focus on other things, right? So, and then what I would do is go further and take away one of the beats, and now you have an empty measure, which you have to fill in. So, and you have to wait a little bit to get it in your system. Don't look at the metronome. Start with whole notes. cetera, et cetera. Moving it around with notes, make it interesting. Play a tune with that, where you just have a downbeat every measure. Make it fun, make it interesting, vary it, come up with your own exercises, come up with some tunes like, Monk's Evidence is like a good example of stuff that's on the upbeat, So those are all 8th note upbeats. So if I have a little faster than that. Swing note upbeat. So, whatever tunes it, and then take away a measure and try that again. Take the measure away. Just vary, make it interesting. I will say one other thing, that the upbeats 16th note is the thing that gets everybody. So the 16th note. So whatever physical thing you have to do, if you have to, the upstroke. Try not to fall into the beat. So I can go on and on and on, but I did a My Music Masterclass thing. If anybody wants to check that out, that I go ad nauseum into all the subdivisions and stuff, and then I get into odd meter stuff. So anyway, that's a brief synopsis.
Thank you, David. That's fantastic. That's great. Hey, John, what about you? What do you want to offer for a 5-minute lesson?
Okay, so let me see. So we change the view a little bit here. So one of the the first thing, one of the things I like to do when I'm practicing for sense of time is assuming the kind of things that I'm going to be practicing. So in this case, I'm going to be setting the metronome to 50 beats a minute, and I'm going to have the metronome clicking for 2 and 4. So now for me, the reason why that's important is because it forces me to assert where I think beat 1 ought to be. 1, 1, 1, 1, and then I'll just play just like a D9 funk pattern. Now, my goal is to make the sound of the metronome disappear into what I'm doing, if I'm doing it correctly or the way I want it to sound. Because I want it to sound and to feel easy, but I want it to be straight down the center of the beat. 1, 2, 3. Now, my path to that ends up being that I have to just really force the issue and to listen and concentrate for a few minutes and then just relax into it. Now, when that happens, that's when I start threatening to be funky. Okay, so that's the first thing. Here's another kind of similar exercise. Let me see if I did this right. Oh, look, I did it right. Okay, so this is an F minor exercise. We're doing 16th notes in group of 3. So if I do this without a metronome, it sounds like this. I'm gonna go. Now Now, you hear me do that for a few minutes and it starts to sound like triplets, right? Now, if I count where the quarter note is against that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add that 2 metronome thing into it. Whoops, wrong metronome. Okay, so 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Here's the whole thing. 1. Now, what's also kind of interesting about that is that I can also take each of these measures and play the measure one at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first measure and just repeat it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now here's the second measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. 1. 1. Okay, here's the third measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. One. So the whole thing about putting the having the metronome click on beat 1 while I'm practicing having the metronome click on beats 2 and 4 is because it kind of forces me to assert where I think beat 1 is. Now, when you're developing your own internal sense of time, that's part of what it is that however you're feeling the beat, and in this case, I'm putting everything down straight down the center. Because I think that's if you can do that, then any variant of that I think is going to be a shorter distance. And a lot of styles, like that Moroccan 6/8 thing that Dave Tronzo was talking about earlier. I experienced a similar thing. I tried it. I still don't get it, but maybe someday. But the point is, if I'm practicing with the metronome clicking 2 and 4 like that, then I have to really sort of assert where I think it is, and that helps me develop my own internal sense of time. Then the next step is to just kind of relax into it and allow it to happen. So I've got way more stuff like that, but probably more time than we have right now.
That's perfect. That's great. And so everyone who's watching this obviously can watch it over and over again because we're going to put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Berklee Guitar Department on YouTube. So you can watch this as many times as you like. And then, obviously, if you're a Berklee student, David Tronzo, David Gilmore, Tim Miller, John Finn teach PSGT 365 and also teach a variety of other classes. Advanced Rhythmic Concepts, David Gilmore, Modern Writing and Spontaneous Composition, and a specific Advanced Concepts for Film Scoring with David Tronzo. John Finn, I don't even remember how many classes you teach, but many advanced rock guitar classes in different semesters. And Tim has a lab as well as private lessons. And so you can study with them there. If you're not a Berklee student, or if you want to add, if you are a Berklee student, David Tronzo has done our Coffee Talk podcast. You can find his episode if you go to wherever you get your podcasts and look up Berklee Guitar Department Coffee Talk. He's back in November. David Gilmore's episode is coming out on Monday. And we're going to be taping next month with Tim Miller and John Finn. So there are a lot of different ways that you can stay in touch with these faculty members and learn from them, whether you're in the classroom with them or whether you're just like on our virtual campus with us until we get back to school as well. So there is a question up, and we do still have about 20 minutes. So I'm going to ask the question to each of you, and you've all already touched on it a little bit, so you don't have to feel like you have to give a long answer. And then there'll be time if there are other things you all want to talk about a little bit. And the question is from our friend Dan Mercury, who's an alum. And he says, how do you go about using and practicing odd meters? And he says intentionally. So Um, I'm gonna go to yeah, intentionally, not by accident. I'm gonna go to David Gilmore first this time, just because David, you have that class called Advanced Rhythmic Concepts, and I think you're known for this in your playing. So could you jump in?
I'm known for being odd, yes, and for playing odd meters, yes. Yeah. So well, okay. I mentioned Steve Coleman earlier, so I learned a lot of this concept from Steve, and there's something that we call the short long beat concept, and the way it works is basically thinking of a clave or feeling a clave, and just like you tap your foot to 4/4 or not, but you feel 4/4, right? Most people don't have to think 4/4. You shouldn't have to think 7/4, 9/4, whatever the meter is. You have some kind of a clave or rhythmic beat that you synchronize to. So let's say something's in. Actually, I can share something real quickly here. Okay, so let's say something's in 7, right? You can break it down 3 different ways. You can have a dotted quarter. Let's say it's in 7/8, dotted quarter and 2 quarters, or the dotted quarter in the middle, or a dotted quarter at the end. So this is short, short, long, where the long beat is a dotted quarter note. So you can also think of it as 2, 2, and 3, or you can think of it as 4 and 3. But I like to just think of syllables, basically. So I'll take this rhythm, and I'll put it in my foot. I'll tap that as my clave, and I'll play simple rhythms over it. So like just I don't know if you can hear my foot or not, but anybody hear that? So I'll just sorry. Now I'll take a 7-note scale so it fits in one measure. Play like 1 octave up and down. Okay. Then I'll take, before I go into quarter notes, 16th notes would be the next subdivision that would be easier. So still keeping my foot. I don't know if you can hear it, but all right. So now I could also do, like we were talking about upbeats. Just going through this quickly. I could take 8th notes and play this on the upbeat. So like on a 16th note, the second 16th note. So so that's on the beat, upbeat. So hearing this against that clave. Quarter notes would be our first kind of over the bar type of thing. And I'm not just tapping my foot, but I'm actually like bobbing my head to it and really like making this my clave. All right. So, and from there, dotted 8th notes. This is interesting. It's like a 3-measure thing. Et cetera, et cetera. All the rhythms that you play over 4/4 over this kind of clave. Another way you can practice it is put the clave like on a low note and play the rhythm on top. Yeah, like a Brazilian samba in 7. All right, so you can practice any of those things with the clave there. So that's like a beginning way to internalize 7, and then begin to work out things so you can play over the bar and make it sound more natural, so that it doesn't sound so metronomic. Like here's a bar of 7, here's a bar of 7. because that's usually what happens is when, people, they tend to frame things in one bar, and you don't do that in 4/4. So why would you do it in 7 or anything else? And then once that's a rhythm that's really solid, you don't need to tap your foot. That's just sort of in you, and that's just one way to think about to internalize the rhythm. That's like the most important thing. There's many other ways. There's Indian syllabic system, and just countless ways. But this is what I kind of came across with Steve Coleman, and it's helped me out tremendously. It's helped me to work out different odd meters, and when I hear a piece of music, I can figure out what it is much quicker based on breaking it down in this way. So that's the long and short of it, no pun intended.
That's fantastic.
Pun intended, yes.
Thank you, David. So I think for the other three of you, if there's something else you'd like to share about odd time, that's fantastic. But if there's also something else you'd like to share about rhythm from your perspective, this would be a great time to do that as we're kind of wrapping up. So, Tim, do you have final thoughts? Something else that you want to touch on?
Well, I mean, just one kind of interesting thing that I do. I mean, this is kind of with the odd meter thing, but just a really quick thing that I learned from a bass player friend of mine one time that was really helpful, and I always remembered it. Was it's maybe a lot more simple than what David was just talking about, because he just touched on a ton of amazing stuff. But this is something a little smaller than that, but I think good. Let's say you're working on 5, okay, which is typically a pretty difficult rhythm, times for people to play in, I found. And it was for me too, and continues to be sometimes. Taking your hand, okay, and doing this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like making each beat into a finger, okay, and then like maybe tapping your foot, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then accenting the different notes in there. So do that, 4, 5, do that. 4, 5, 2, that, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, that, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was really helpful for me because it was putting together, your hand and your voice and your ability to accent, and I felt like just having this whole thing working together was very helpful for me to understand 5 better, because it had a physical thing and it also had like a singing thing together. You could do it with 7, you could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, or you could 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. You could do like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and then say, okay, I want to see what does it feel like if I act third note. That was really helpful, and the hands keep you on track. Because I find when you're beginning with odd meters, what happens is you're going to hear a lot of things in 4, even if it's in 5, you're going to convert it to 4 by accident. And if you're in 7, you're going to accidentally convert it to 8, that kind of thing. And I think the fingers keep you on track because they say, no, you're wrong. We were on that finger, right? And it's just kind of like a beginner's way to get into these odd meters, but ends up being super helpful even down the road too. Especially like, let's say if you have a chart. I remember doing this. Someone gave me a chart in 5, and it was really difficult to sight read. Like I was having a really hard time with it, and I was trying to learn this tune for this gig, and I did that thing like, what beat is this note coming in on? And I just sang it like, okay, I see it's on, it's on those specific beats. Use my fingers, and then I could start to sing it, and then once I could sing it, then I feel like I can start to play it. if I can sing it. So I guess my final thoughts, sort of piggyback on top of that, would be, in my opinion, if you want to get better with rhythms, I would start with the voice, because I think the voice is the thing that is basically, you know, coming straight from your brain, and that's the thing that can help to control your hands to do what you want them to do rhythmically, playing an instrument. So I would start with the voice. I would start with singing. I would sing all of your rhythms, and I would try and convert that to your guitar. That typically helps people with their time more than just about anything that I've experienced.
Thank you, Tim. That's great. I want everyone who's watching to know that we're all doing the exercises with each other. Like, we can all watch each other do them. So go and do them. We're at work stealing everything from everyone today. John Finn, I want to hop over to you next, just because I was watching you watch Tim, and I think you may have some different things to add and maybe some similar things. So what's on your mind with some final thoughts or one more thing to add in?
So, I guess anytime I ever deal with odd time signatures, I am always looking for ways to think about how to resolve it to a way that I can actually feel and understand. And I wanted to show a quick little example. I'm going to play a portion of one of my tunes, just a short little burst, but it was a thought experiment that I did years ago. I wanted to see if I could write a tune in 15/16 and have it sound like not some exercise that I did for an arranging class, right? So when I thought about 15/16 and the different ways that you can divide that up, the first thing, well, 15 is 5 groups of 3. So I could think of it as a triplet field with 5 beats. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 1. Or I can think of it as 3 sets of 5. One, and then another way to think of it is 4/4 with a slightly shorter 4th beat. Sort of alluding to what David Gilmour was talking about, but just maybe a slightly different way of thinking of it. So in other words, it's a quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, and then followed by a dotted 8th note. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now, if I frame it that way, then each subsequent downbeat can feel like a 16th note anticipation. Like if you're playing a 16th note groove and the drummer's doing 16th note anticipations, right? Right? So then what this is doing is making that anticipation the downbeat. So this is a tune called Return from Timbuktu. It's in 15, and all 3 examples are shown in the piece. So I'm just going to play like a minute or less of it. And on and on and on and on. So,
Smoking.
Yeah, thank you. So, but like I said, so one of the phrases is is that 4/4 with a short fourth beat is that's basically what the drummer's playing. The synthesizer and later guitar was playing 5 sets of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. Okay. Then the other one was playing 3 sets of 5. Right? So if that makes sense.
Yes, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's fantastic. Um, that's so important. The layering of the different feels. I love that. David Tronzo, what do you have? What as your final thoughts here that you would like to share? You have many more thoughts.
First of all, I just have to thank my fellow colleagues here for such a stupendous panel. And this last lesson has just been mind-blowing. You guys are masters, and it's off the hook. I love it. So thank you. Couple of things. So first of all, I always like to remember that rhythms and rhythm and its relationship to time is how everything functions. So all phrases arrive because of rhythm. All melodic rhythms, like resolutions are all rhythmic before they're melodic or harmonic. If you change the rhythm of a chord cadence, it resolves. If you disrupt the rhythm, the same chord cadence or pitch melody will not resolve. It's all rhythmically driven. The pitches don't decide very much, That being said, I'll leave that there. A couple of things about odd rhythms. I am not by any stretch a master of odd rhythms, but I did have 2 experiences worth noting. One was, because rhythms are in the body, obviously, like when I would have a student who was, having some difficulty relating even to basic duple subdivision, my lessons, especially in the 1140 building that would be taught after like 6 p.m., I used to teach till like 9 at night in the early days. We would go walk the halls together, and it would be left, right would be our 8th note, or it could be our quarter note, strong, weak, and we would clap rhythms or just count out loud and get this thing that you have when you're a child, which is the stuff is in your body. You already own it. You own all of it. And it starts with duple. It's a heartbeat or right, left. This, by the way, clapping, tapping, or walking gets both hemispheres of the brain communicating. It's a thing, it's unavoidable. It's a brilliant thing to do. The other thing was I was up in Canada, and I was working as part of this, school that was attached, or this workshop that was attached to the Atlantic Jazz Festival, which was also like a global music festival. While we were there, we'd be working with all kinds of people, of every age and type and stripe. And one of the exercises the bass player brought was he would go like this. He would go, we're going to clap like this, and this is going to be 1 of 1, 2. Right? So it's going to be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And if you want to do 1, 2, 3, you go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to put everything together like that. And at any point in the group, you can go back to the 1-2s, you can go back to a 1, 2, 3, or any combination. So you go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Then we do 5. We go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. We do 7. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now, of course, we're putting the 1-2s first. And David had that thing where, you can move them around. But this kept it kind of simple for everybody. And then at any point during this little group interaction, anyone could go to any rhythm. So we might go like this: 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. And the layering that would happen in a group of 6 or 8 people, and we could slow it down, they could walk back and forth. It was magnificent over a period of days what happened to people's rhythm awareness and their ability to relate and relax. Now, at the same festival, there was a very famous Romanian gypsy group called Tarif Tahaduk. They're unbelievable. And they were there, and there was a group there also of these young musicians from all the Balkan countries, like a collective, that did representational versions of all the music of the Balkans, whereas Tarif Tahaduk was Rome, Romanian Rom gypsy music. And the leader of the young group was asking the elder of Tarif about this tune. And he said, "It's in 7, right?" They have a translator. And the guy goes, "No, it's in 4." And the kid says, "No, it's in 7." And he counts it out. This is going to relate to the long short thing. He goes, "No, it's in 4." So a crude version of what they were talking about was the kid was saying it's right, with some variation. And the guy goes, no, it's a slow 4 and a fast 4. And he counted the two things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And what it was related to was the dance that you did during this rhythm. You danced a dance very similar to like a waltz step, and it fluxed a little bit, so the 4s could change length. So if you put a metronome on, you were toast. But of course, if you put a metronome on during a Robert Johnson record, you're toast also. You know what I mean? Like within 5 seconds, it's on the back beat. And then back again, right? Because that's how music can be, obviously. So I marveled at this beautiful discussion. And sure enough, the young group that did the Balkan diaspora, they changed their whole approach and they started teaching all the dances. When they would come to a festival, they would hold these dance workshops. And that's how you related to this complicated music. And I went to one of these and I learned, I can't do it now. I learned how to dance a few of these dances. And then the coin just goes, bing, because what else is there but the body? So that's it.
That was beautiful. That's great.
Amen.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was just going to say amen. It's true. It's, these cultures are dancing in 7 and 9 and 11, and it's in the culture, it's in the body. So there's nothing complicated about anything, really. It's just unfamiliar.
I love that this conversation has come back around after these hours to just remind everyone about the holistic nature of rhythm. There's so many parts and there's so many layers, and yet it's a big topic that has holistic implications. And it's a really wonderful start. This has been an incredible panel. And I just want to thank everybody so much for being here. Remember, if you're watching, these 4 faculty members, Tim Miller, David Gilmore, David Tronzo, and John Finn, teach every semester in the guitar department. Some of them teach in the summer. All of them teach in the fall and the spring. You can study with them. You can also hear them interviewed on our department podcast, which is called Berklee Guitar Department Coffee Talk, wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch this as many times as you like on our YouTube channel. And there's a lot of other performances from all 4 of these musicians on our YouTube channel. We also do a lot of stuff on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we hope that you keep coming back. We're hoping that this is just the second in a very long series, and we can have these musicians back to teach on different topics as we move forward. So please stay with us with all of that. And I just wanted to say again, as I thank you all, it's really incredible, everyone. If you look at the way these musicians approach music, the way they know their traditions, the way they can teach very specifically and very conceptually in 5 minutes or 3 minutes, it's incredible. And so that's what hopefully you're all working on and thinking about. I just also want to give a shout out to Jane Miller, our colleague, Professor Jane Miller, because it was Jane Miller just did a masterclass series, which is also on our YouTube channel, for our series with the Career Center about how to teach a lesson in 5 minutes. So clearly all of the faculty here could teach that lesson as well. If you all want to learn how to do what they did, you can go watch Jane Miller teach you how to do it, and it's up on our YouTube channel right now. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much for having me, Kim. Really a pleasure.
Welcome. Thank you, David Gilmore.
Thank you. Great that you're doing this, and this is wonderful. I've learned so much today.
Thank you, David Tronzo.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Cheryl and Ian and Ben. And thank you, my fellow colleagues. David Gilmour, Tim Miller, and John Finn.
And
Those are
thank
my
you,
heroes.
John Finn.
Thank you for putting on the Kim and Cheryl. Thank you for putting this on. Tim, Dave, and
Dave. And Dave.
and
Don't
Dave.
forget Dave.
Thank you. I'm going to be practicing for the next couple of years now. So thank you for that. This is awesome. Thanks.
I appreciate that. So panelists, hang around, and everybody else, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.